Something strange just happened around Caitlin Clark, and fans cannot stop arguing about it. Because after one of the most frustrating losses of the season, reporters were waiting for answers. Cameras were ready. Microphones were set up. Everybody expected Caitlin Clark to walk into the media room and explain what happened. But she never showed up. Instead, she left without saying a word. And within minutes, the internet completely exploded. Now on the surface, this might not sound like a huge deal. Athletes get media sessions all the time. But this situation feels different. Because this isn't happening in a normal moment for the WNBA. The pressure is already at an all-time high. Every Caitlin Clark game becomes a headline. Every reaction becomes a debate. Every mistake becomes national news. And now, after walking away without speaking, fans are creating theories faster than anyone can keep up with them. Some people think she was simply frustrated after the loss. Others believe the non-stop criticism is finally starting to wear on her. And then there are fans who think this entire situation points to a much bigger problem quietly growing around the league itself. Because over the past few months, the conversation surrounding Caitlin Clark has become bigger than basketball. It's become emotional. It's become personal. And honestly, it's becoming impossible to separate the player from the controversy anymore. But here's where things take a wild turn. The more people looked into what happened after that game, the more questions started appearing. And the answers? They may not be what anyone expected. And the reason fans are reacting so strongly to this situation is because it didn't happen in isolation. If this had happened a year ago, most people probably would have moved on within a day. But this is Caitlin Clark. And right now, almost everything surrounding her turns into a national conversation. That's why the moment news started spreading that she left without speaking to reporters, the discussion immediately split into completely different directions. Some fans defended her instantly. They argued that athletes are human, that frustration after a difficult loss is normal, that nobody should be expected to answer questions every single time things go wrong. And honestly, there are plenty of people who see it exactly that way. But on the other side, a growing group of fans believe this situation was about much more than one missed media session. Because according to them, this wasn't just another bad night. It was another chapter in a much bigger story that has been building around Caitlin Clark for months. A story filled with pressure, expectations, controversy, and non-stop attention unlike almost anything the WNBA has experienced before. Because whether people love her or criticize her, one thing is impossible to deny. Caitlin Clark has become the center of the basketball universe. Every game gets analyzed. Every quote becomes a headline. Every reaction creates another debate. And eventually, fans started wondering whether that level of attention was sustainable for anyone. That question suddenly became much louder after this latest incident. Because the internet doesn't like silence. Especially when the person staying silent happens to be the biggest name in the sport. And the longer people went without hearing from her, the more theories started appearing online. Some viewers believed she was frustrated with the loss itself. Others believed she was exhausted by weeks of criticism coming from every direction. But then another theory started spreading. And this is where things became interesting. Because some fans weren't talking about Caitlin Clark at all. They were talking about the environment around her. They were talking about the pressure cooker that seems to surround every single thing she does. Think about it. When most players have a rough game, the conversation lasts a few hours. When Caitlin Clark has a rough game, the conversation can dominate sports media for days. When most players make a mistake, fans move on quickly. When Caitlin Clark makes a mistake, it becomes content. Debates, podcasts, reaction videos, social media arguments, and endless headlines. That level of scrutiny changes everything. Because eventually every action starts carrying meaning whether it deserves to or not. Suddenly walking away after a game isn't just walking away. It becomes a statement. Or at least people treat it like one. And that's exactly what happened here. Within hours, fans were trying to decode what the silence meant. Was she angry? Was she frustrated? Was she tired of answering the same questions over and over again? Or was this simply a player having a difficult night who wanted to move on? The problem is that nobody seemed satisfied with the simplest explanation. Because the internet rarely chooses the simple explanation anymore. It chooses the dramatic one. And Caitlin Clark's name generates drama faster than almost anyone else in sports right now. That's why this story continued growing long after the game ended. Because fans weren't just discussing what happened. They were projecting larger concerns onto the situation. Concerns about media pressure. Concerns about expectations. Concerns about whether the league has accidentally created an environment where one player is carrying an impossible amount of attention. And honestly, that concern isn't coming from just one side anymore. Even people who strongly support Caitlin Clark are beginning to ask questions about what all this attention is doing to the sport. Because every major discussion somehow circles back to the same person. Every controversy becomes connected to the same name. Every viral debate seems to involve the same player. And when that happens long enough, people start wondering whether the conversation around basketball is becoming bigger than basketball itself. That's why this latest incident felt different. It wasn't just about a post-game media session. It became another symbol in a growing debate about pressure, expectations, and the cost of becoming the face of an entire league. And the more fans argued about what happened, the more another question started emerging. What if the real story isn't why Caitlin Clark stayed silent, but why so many people expected her to explain everything in the first place? The problem is that once a player becomes the face of an entire league, every decision starts carrying a weight that most athletes never have to deal with. And that's exactly where Caitlin Clark finds herself right now. Because whether fans like it or not, she is no longer being judged the same way as everyone else. Every reaction gets magnified. Every comment gets analyzed. Every moment becomes another piece of a larger narrative that millions of people are already invested in. And that means even silence can become a headline. The moment she walked away without speaking, people immediately filled that silence with their own interpretations. Some saw frustration. Some saw exhaustion. Some saw pressure finally catching up. But what made the situation even more fascinating was how quickly the conversation stopped being about the game itself. Almost nobody was discussing the actual basketball anymore. Instead, everyone was debating what Caitlin Clark's actions meant and what they revealed about the current state of the WNBA. That shift says a lot about where the league is right now. Because the WNBA is experiencing something it has never experienced before, a level of attention where every small moment can become a national story overnight. Years ago, an athlete skipping media after a tough loss might have received a brief mention before everyone moved on. Now, it becomes a viral topic that dominates timelines for days. And that's because the audience around women's basketball has changed dramatically. There are more viewers, more media outlets, more fan accounts, and more people emotionally invested than ever before. The result is a non-stop cycle where every event gets amplified far beyond what happens on the court. And that amplification is creating a strange environment around Caitlin Clark. Because while the attention has helped grow the league, it has also created expectations that seem almost impossible to meet. Fans want answers after every game. Reporters want reactions after every controversy. Social media wants content after every moment. And eventually, people start wondering whether any athlete can operate normally under that kind of microscope. Because no matter what she does, somebody is going to turn it into a debate. If she speaks, her words get dissected. If she stays silent, her silence gets dissected. Either way, the conversation keeps growing. That's why some fans believe this situation revealed something much bigger than one post-game decision. They think it exposed how intense the spotlight around Caitlin Clark has become. Because the reaction wasn't proportional to the event itself. The reaction was driven by what she represents. For supporters, she represents the future growth of the league. For critics, she represents the media obsession that dominates coverage. And for everyone in between, she has become the center of nearly every major discussion happening in women's basketball today. The most surprising part is that the debate keeps feeding itself. Every argument creates more attention. More attention creates more pressure. More pressure creates more controversy. And more controversy creates another wave of arguments. It's a cycle that seems to get stronger every week. And as the internet continued arguing about her silent exit, another uncomfortable question started appearing in conversations. What happens if this pressure keeps building? Because if fans are already reacting this strongly to one missed media session, what happens the next time a bigger controversy arrives? And judging by the way the season has unfolded so far, that possibility may be much closer than people realize. The reality is that this situation may have revealed something the WNBA has been trying to manage for a long time. Because while the league is enjoying unprecedented attention, that attention is becoming harder and harder to control. Every week brings a new controversy, a new debate, or a new viral moment that completely takes over the conversation. And somehow, Caitlin Clark keeps finding herself at the center of it. Not necessarily because she creates the drama herself, but because the spotlight surrounding her is now so massive that even ordinary moments start generating extraordinary reactions. And that's exactly why this latest incident exploded the way it did. The more fans discussed her decision to leave without speaking, the more they started talking about the relationship between Caitlin Clark and the media itself. Because from the moment she entered the professional game, she has been under a level of scrutiny that very few athletes ever experience. Every performance gets graded. Every comment gets analyzed. Every expression gets turned into a storyline. And over time, that kind of environment can change the way people view even the smallest interactions. Suddenly, a player walking past reporters becomes a major discussion. Suddenly, a quiet moment becomes a national headline. And suddenly, everyone feels like they need to pick a side. Some fans argue that this is simply the responsibility that comes with being the biggest star in the league. They believe answering questions after difficult losses is part of the job and that public figures cannot choose when they want attention and when they don't. But others see the situation very differently. They argue that the expectations surrounding Caitlin Clark have become unrealistic, that she is being asked to carry not only her team's performance, but also the weight of the league's growth, media attention, and public perception all at the same time. And when viewed through that lens, the reaction to her silence starts looking very different. That divide is exactly what makes this story so fascinating, because people are no longer debating what happened. They're debating what it means. And when a sports story reaches that stage, it usually becomes much bigger than the original event itself. The discussion starts taking on a life of its own. Fans begin connecting unrelated moments together. Old controversies get brought back into the conversation. Previous criticisms get revisited. And before long, one post-game decision turns into a referendum on an entire season. Before long, one post-game decision turns into a referendum on an entire season. What's even more interesting is that this debate reflects something happening across modern sports in general. Athletes are expected to be available constantly. They are expected to perform, explain, react, engage, and represent their teams every single day. And social media has intensified those expectations dramatically. Fans no longer wait for official interviews. They want immediate reactions. They want instant explanations. They want answers in real time. And when those answers don't arrive, speculation rushes in to fill the gap. That's exactly what happened here. The silence created a vacuum, and the internet immediately filled it with theories. Some reasonable, some emotional, some completely wild. But all of them contributed to making the story larger than it probably would have been otherwise. And the longer the debate continued, the clearer it became that this was never just about one game. It was about pressure, expectation, visibility, and the unique position Caitlin Clark occupies inside the sports world right now. Because whether people support her or criticize her, one fact remains impossible to ignore. Very few athletes generate this level of reaction from a single moment. And that tells you everything about where the league stands today. The attention is bigger, the emotions are stronger, and the audience is more invested than ever before. But with that growth comes a new challenge. Every controversy becomes amplified. Every mistake becomes magnified. And every decision becomes part of a much larger narrative. And as fans continue arguing about what her silence really meant, another question is quietly starting to emerge. If one missed media appearance can create this much chaos, what happens when the next major controversy arrives? Because if this season has proven anything so far, it's that the biggest stories in the WNBA are no longer ending when the final buzzer sounds. Sometimes, they're only just beginning. And that may be the most important part of this entire story. Because while fans continue arguing about whether Caitlin Clark should have spoken after the loss, a much bigger issue is quietly emerging underneath the surface. The reaction itself is becoming the story. And when the reaction becomes bigger than the event that caused it, that's usually a sign that something has fundamentally changed. The WNBA is no longer operating in the same environment it was even a few years ago. Today, every major moment exists in two different realities at the same time. There's the game itself, and then there's the internet's version of the game. Sometimes those two realities match perfectly, but other times, the online narrative becomes so powerful that it completely overshadows what actually happened on the court. And that's exactly what some fans believe happened here. Because if you step back and look at the situation objectively, the original event was relatively simple. A player left without speaking to the media after a disappointing loss. That happens in sports, has happened before. It will happen again. But because the player involved was Caitlin Clark, the situation instantly transformed into something much larger. Suddenly people weren't discussing basketball anymore. They were discussing pressure. They were discussing media responsibility. They were discussing celebrity culture. They were discussing whether the biggest star in the league is being treated fairly or unfairly. And once all of those conversations collide together, the original story almost disappears completely. That's why some longtime fans are starting to say the league has entered a new era. An era where attention moves faster than facts, where reactions spread faster than context, and where perception can become more influential than reality itself. Because every time a controversy appears, social media immediately begins constructing competing narratives around it. One side believes one thing, another side believes something completely different. And within hours, millions of people are arguing over interpretations instead of information. And honestly, that dynamic may be impossible for the league to control anymore, because the audience has become part of the storytelling process. Fans aren't just consuming narratives now. They're creating them. They're amplifying them. They're reshaping them in real time. And that means every major player eventually becomes trapped inside those narratives whether they want to be or not. That's what makes Caitlin Clark's situation so unique. Because she isn't simply carrying the expectations of a star athlete anymore. She's carrying the expectations of an audience that sees her as the center of every major conversation happening in women's basketball. For some fans, she represents the future. For others, she represents media obsession. For others, she represents the growing divide inside the sport itself. And when one athlete becomes all of those things simultaneously, every action suddenly feels larger than life. Even silence, especially silence. Because silence allows people to create their own explanations. And once that starts happening, the story can move in directions nobody expected. That's exactly why this debate refuses to disappear. Not because fans are still focused on what happened after the game, but because they're focused on what the situation might reveal about everything happening around the league right now. The pressure, the attention, the expectations, the non-stop spotlight, all of it. And as the season continues, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The biggest challenge facing the WNBA may not be attracting attention anymore. It may be managing what happens after that attention arrives. Because attention creates narratives. Narratives create expectations. And expectations create pressure. And right now, that pressure feels heavier than ever. Which means this likely won't be the last time a seemingly small moment turns into a massive national debate. If anything, it may be a preview of what's still to come. Because the conversation surrounding Caitlin Clark is no longer just following the games. In many ways, it's creating a story of its own. And judging by how quickly this latest controversy exploded, that story may be getting bigger than anyone expected. And now the question goes back to you. Because after everything we've covered in this video, the debate is bigger than ever. Some fans believe Caitlin Clark is simply dealing with the pressure that comes with being the biggest star in women's basketball. Others think the reaction to her silence proves that the spotlight around her has become completely out of control. And honestly, that's what makes this situation so fascinating. Because no matter which side you're on, one thing is impossible to ignore. People aren't just talking about a game anymore. They're talking about what the game has become. They're talking about media attention. They're talking about expectations. They're talking about narratives. And they're talking about whether the WNBA is entering a completely new era where every small moment can become a massive controversy overnight. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think fans are overreacting to Caitlin Clark leaving without speaking to the media? Or do you think this situation reveals a much bigger issue that's been building around the league for months? Drop your opinion in the comments below, because this is one of the most divided conversations in basketball right now, and I want to know where you stand. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to hit the like button because it helps the channel reach more basketball fans who love these deeper conversations. Subscribe if you're interested in WNBA drama, women's basketball stories, viral sports debates, and the narratives nobody else is talking about. And turn on notifications because the next headline, the next controversy, and the next major twist in this story could happen at any moment. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the biggest story isn't what happened on the court. It's what happens after everyone starts talking about it.